Hello everyone. This story is about, what if Naruto and Hinata married early? Hope you like it. Let's start. Upon awakening, Hinata, Naruto, and Hayashi had three very different reactions to yesterday's events, and three very different outlooks on the events that were likely to occur today. Hinata awoke slowly, feeling like she had just awoken from a very long dream. She immediately thought of everything that had happened since she had called to Naruto, and she knew it had to be a dream. She fully believed none of it was real. She sighed and began to ridicule herself. She got up, showered, and dressed with no real enthusiasm. She didn't bother to check her calendar, assuming the second exam was going to begin that day. She shook her head at herself, thinking how foolish Naruto would think she was if he knew about her dream. She walked to the dining area and nearly lost her balance when she saw Niji there, sitting at the table. She lifted her finger to her mouth, an old nervous habit, and was about to turn and leave when he spoke. "Why do you flee from me, cousin?" he asked, genuinely confused. He had thought after their last talk that they would be able to eat together and speak this day. He was, for the first time in his life, legitimately interested in getting to know his younger cousin. "Or am I not worthy to eat with you?" He said this last bit lightly, teasing his cousin. Hinata turned and looked at him, slowly realizing that at least that part of her dream had been real. She sat across from Niji, smiling softly, and told him, "I'm sorry, Niji, I forgot about what happened. I'm so used to you being cold and hateful, it's just hard to break the habit." "Forgive me?" "Of course, cousin. After all, you've forgiven me for much worse than that." He grinned and held a hand out to her. She took it softly and they shook hands. It felt right for some reason. Then she sat, and soon they were talking easily while they waited for breakfast. Meanwhile, Hayashi was waking up and showering with a similar lack of enthusiasm to Hinata's, though his was for a totally different reason. He couldn't help smiling for his daughter's happiness, but he was dreading telling the family council that he had arranged for his daughter, the heiress of the clan, to marry the Jinchuriki. He knew they'd just love that. Then he laughed at himself and reminded himself that if Hinata was happy, it'd be worth it. He dressed, somewhat lighter at heart, and made his way to the dining hall as well. When he arrived, he found Hinata and Niji talking and laughing easily. He came in and sat at the head of the table. "Good morning, Lord Hayashi," Niji greeted him. "Good morning, father," Hinata said, smiling. Hayashi smiled at the two cousins. "Good morning, children. I'm glad to see you two being so friendly to one another now." The two cousins smiled at him and one another happily. They were glad the tension between them was gone as well. After a few moments, Hinata finally spoke up, determined to confirm or refute her dream. She said to her father, deciding to act as if the dream was real, "Father, have you told anyone about your discussion with Naruto last night?" Hayashi laughed, realizing what Hinata was doing, then told her, "Not yet, and I'm sure the council will just love this one. Though, you are certainly welcome to talk about it if you wish." "So, it was real?" she asked. Hayashi nodded. Hinata blushed, realizing what this meant. Then she remembered Naruto's ring, and looked at her finger. Sure enough, the mark it had left was there. She giggled and squealed a little at how happy she was. Niji couldn't take it. He was curious, and Hinata's squeal was too much. He had to ask. "What happened, Hinata?" Hinata blushed and smiled at Niji, then looked at her father, who nodded. Hinata held up her hand, so both her cousin and her father could see the mark on her finger. Hayashi realized what it meant, and grinned. Niji raised his eyebrow, waiting for her to start talking. "You see the mark here on my finger?" Niji nodded. "I'm engaged." Niji jumped visibly at this. Engaged," he choked out. He couldn't believe he had just stuttered like that, but he was shocked. Hinata nodded. "To whom?" "Naruto." She smiled even wider, the reality setting in on her, that her dream really was real. Niji was even more shocked by this and looked at Hayashi. "You knew?" Hayashi nodded. "And you approve?" Hayashi grinned. "I arranged it, Niji." Niji thought things couldn't get any weirder, but that did it. "What in the world do you mean, uncle?" "You arranged for Naruto and Hinata to be married?" Hayashi nodded, watching Niji closely. "Why?" Hayashi burst out laughing again. "Niji, you know I love my daughter." And you know I want her to be happy, yes? Niji nodded, thinking to himself that only a total moron would be unaware of how Hayashi felt for his daughter. And you can see that she is happier now than she has ever been, can you not? Niji nodded again, then smiled, seeing his uncle's point. Niji bowed to Hinata slightly. You have my congratulations, cousin. Hinata smiled and blushed, then Niji continued, I hope I may find the same happiness someday. Hinata blushed slightly, then remembered hearing Tenten mention to Lee that she liked Niji. She wasn't privy to the conversation, but perhaps she could use the information to her benefit. She grinned and told Niji, you should ask Tenten out. Niji jumped, wondering how Hinata had known of his crush on his teammate, but Hinata continued, I think she has a crush on you. Niji blushed, but asked, you think so? Hinata laughed, I don't think so, I know so, cousin. Niji stiffened slightly, but Hinata said, I heard her talking to Lee one day, and she was saying she wished you'd ask her out. Hinata shrugged. Then said, I figure you may find what you seek there. Niji thought a moment, then nodded to Hinata. Thank you, cousin. He took her hand gently, and they smiled at one another, happy with the bond between them. Then he turned to Hayashi. Uncle, may I ask a favor of you and Hinata? They each looked at him curiously, and nodded. Niji continued, you two are the closest I have to a father and a sister. I was wondering, if you would mind if I were to refer to you as such? He looked down, sure one or the other would be offended and tell him no. Hayashi grinned. I would be honored, Niji. You are like a son to me, so to have you call me father would be a great pleasure. Niji looked at him, surprised, then smiled. Then he turned slowly to Hinata. Hinata smiled softly and nodded. You do us both a great honor, brother. Niji smiled at the change in term. Father, sister, I thank you both. They each smiled and nodded to him. It was then that several branch family members came and served the three of them breakfast. The three ate in silence, then Niji rose and said, please excuse me. I have training to get to. The other two nodded and he fled quickly, letting go with the happy tears he had been holding in since they had allowed him into their circle. Hinata looked to her father, then said, I'm sorry father. I didn't know how to get you to confirm what had happened. I woke up this morning and was so sure it was just a dream. That's why I said what I did. To get you to either tell me that it was real or confirm my fear that it was a dream. Hayashi nodded. I figured it was something like that, daughter. And I'm not offended. I'm just happy for you. And don't worry about the council. They won't dare oppose me. She smiled, knowing how forceful her father could be if he so chose. Then Hinata thought of something. Father, I should tell you something. Last night, when you told me Naruto had refused, I nearly panicked. The thing is, I told him before your talk that you were going to do that. And he proposed to me. She indicated her finger again. He gave me a chakra ring of sorts, for now. So when you said he refused, I was afraid he had been toying with me. But when you said he accepted, father, I've never been so happy in my life. Hayashi smiled. Daughter, I would do anything for your happiness, so I'm glad to see you so happy. And I did offer Naruto power, money, all of the things I said I did, and he did turn them all away. Then I told him it would make you and me happy, and that's all he wanted. That's when he accepted. He truly desires your happiness, so I am happy for you both. Hinata looked shocked. What do you mean, father? Why would you offer him money? Hayashi laughed, not like a dowry, daughter. I told him he would have the Hyuga fortune because of being married to you. He turned me down flat. I told him he'd have power, respect, influence, and he told me he wasn't interested in any of that. Then I told him it would make you happy, and he said he would be happy to marry you. Hinata smiled, realizing what that meant. Naruto didn't want her for her money, or her family, or their position. He just wanted her. She'd have to talk to him about that. She rose and bowed to her father, then went to him and hugged him. I'm heading out for the day, father. I love you. He hugged her back and said, I love you too, daughter. And have a good time with Naruto. She smiled at that. I'm sure I will, father. And thank you again. She kissed his cheek, then ran off, skipping lightly. Hayashi smiled and touched his cheek where her lips had touched. Hinata didn't remember until she was already gone that she and Naruto hadn't planned a date for that day. She decided to surprise him. She just hoped he was sleeping in that day. She skipped to his house, moving lighter and faster than she had in a long time. She got to his small apartment and picked the lock using her chakra, laughing at how easy it was. She went in and found him still asleep. She turned his alarm off, just in case, and looked around his one-room apartment. He had a small main room of sorts, where his table, bed, and 2 chairs took up most of the room. The kitchen was along one wall, with a stove, small oven, a sink that could barely hold the 3 bowls the boy seemed to own, and his refrigerator, which was the only full-sized appliance in the apartment. In his bathroom were his washing machine and dryer, a single unit that had the dryer above and the washer below, a shower stall that she knew he'd barely have room to turn around in, a sink even smaller than the kitchen one, which shocked her, and his toilet, with about 4 square feet of empty floor space between them. The whole apartment felt very cramped, especially to Hinata, who was used to the Hyuga mansion. Hinata found the mess in the apartment was a bit much for how small the place was, but it wasn't much really. She picked up and did a little dusting and cleaned the windows in about 20 minutes. Then she checked what food he had and made him some breakfast. She was surprised he had food other than ramen, but she wasn't complaining. She threw his clothes in the washer and turned it on. Everything was so quiet he hadn't even awoken yet. Giggling to herself, she set his breakfast on the table, then walked over and kissed his forehead. He groaned slightly and wrinkled up his nose and forehead. She giggled again, then cupped his cheek in one of her hands and whispered, "Naruto, wake up." Naruto sat up straight at the sound of her voice. He looked at her and gasped. "Hinata, what are you doing here?" This seemed the obvious question to him. She giggled at his look of shock and handed him his breakfast. He gasped again and was fighting back tears as she said, "I made you breakfast." He took it from her and ate slowly, savoring the crisp bacon, the light fluffy eggs, and the warm toast. After he finished, she asked, "How was it?" "Hinata, this was probably the best breakfast I've ever had." "Thank you." She blushed at the compliment. Then he remembered where they were and when. "But you never answered me. What are you doing here?" Hinata smiled. "I wanted to see you. And I decided to come over here and surprise you. I picked your lock with my chakra and came in, cleaned up, and made you breakfast." Naruto looked around and saw that it was true. The place was clean, dusted, neat, and his clothes, where were they? "Where are my clothes?" "In the washer." She got up at that point, checked the washer, which was done, and moved them to the dryer. She came back and sat down in front of him again. "In the dryer now." He blushed as he realized she had been handling his clothing. But she didn't seem to mind. He turned to her, looked her in the eyes and said, "Hinata, this is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. Thank you so much. But, why are you doing all this?" Hinata smiled and said, "I told you. I wanted to surprise you. And I wanted to see you. Besides, I wouldn't be a very good fiancé if I didn't see to it you got a good breakfast, now would I?" She put her hands on her hips at the last part and gave him a mock-stern glare. Naruto blanched. Fiancé? So, he had just woken up, so he hadn't really remembered the events of the previous day yet. Hearing that reminded him though, and he smiled. He said softly, "I truly thank you, Hinata. You've done more for me already than anyone else has ever bothered to do." Hinata sighed, happy in his praise, then remembered her conversation with her father. "Naruto, father was telling me about your discussion with him last night." He looked slightly worried at this, so she continued, "He told me you turned down money, power, influence, all that. And that you only agreed when he said it would make me happy." Naruto sighed, relieved, then said, "Yes, Hinata, that's true. I don't want money or power, or any of that. I just want you to be happy." She blushed prettily, but pushed on, "Why is that, Naruto? Why would you be so determined to make me happy? I mean, it's not like we've been together long or anything, and already your determination to make me happy is astounding." Naruto blanched slightly, then said, "I can't tell you yet, Hinata. I will tell you, and soon, I promise, but not yet, okay?" Hinata was slightly disappointed, but she thought a moment and nodded, "I don't want to push you, Naruto. I was just curious." He came to her and took her hands in his, saying, "There is a reason, Hinata. And I promise you, I'll tell you as soon as I can. Just, not yet. Trust me, okay?" She nodded again, and he lifted her to her feet. She grinned and let him pull her to him. Then he took her right hand in his left, and put his right hand on her waist. She put her free hand on his shoulder, then asked him, "What are you doing, Naruto?" He grinned and told her, "I've always wanted to try this." He led her into a slow dance. She followed, letting him set the beat. After a few steps, he spun her away and pulled her back, keeping the beat perfectly. She was impressed. They danced a little longer, then he spun her again, this time pulling her into an embrace when she came back. They stood there a while in one another's arms, just happy to be close to each other and to not be alone anymore. After a few minutes, Hinata reluctantly pulled back. "I'm sorry, Naruto, but I've got to go. I have to meet my team in half an hour for our training for today." He nodded. "Hinata?" She looked at him. "When you get done training for today, come back by, okay?" She gave him an odd look and he explained, "Your father told me that whenever you're with me, he wants me to make sure you get back to him and only him. You're with me now, and you're going there, so I need to see to it you get back to him after that." She smiled and nodded. "I'll see you in a while then, Naruto." She left, smiling happily at his thoughtfulness. Naruto, meanwhile, laid back on his bed and smiled, thinking. He couldn't believe this had happened. After all, just a few days ago, he had been ready to give in to all the hate in the village and to just slink away in shame. Now, days later, he had a girl who loved him, who was his fiancée, who had just cooked him breakfast and cleaned up his place just because she wanted to. And who was quite honestly the prettiest girl in the whole village. He laughed at himself as he thought of that. He had thought Sakura was the prettiest at one time, but now she paled in comparison to Hinata. Maybe it was true what they said, that the more you got to know someone, the more they looked different to you. Maybe. He put his hands behind his head as he remembered what had happened with Sakura that had made him see her differently. Then he thought of how Hinata had yelled at him to not give up, and that he could do it. He closed his eyes and replayed that day in his head, realizing again how much a difference a single call could make. He laughed quietly, thinking to himself that if she hadn't done that, he wouldn't have even noticed her. He smiled. He was so glad she had called out to him. He grinned, then thought to himself that he'd have to make sure he didn't let anything come between them and that he never did anything to hurt her. He laughed softly at himself when he realized the very thought of hurting her was like a dagger in his heart. He knew then and there that he'd never hurt her. He got up and got showered, got his clothes out of the dryer, and got dressed. 10 minutes later, Naruto's special place. Naruto smiled as he arrived at the place. He'd found this place some years before, back when everyone in the village hated him. He only came here because it somehow felt like home. He had gotten in through a window after learning the tree climbing technique. It hadn't been locked, and when he got in, he found a room full of scrolls. One of them had detailed the jutsu he had just recently showed Hinata. It was the only one in the entire collection with no name, so it was the first one he had learned. He had found a few wind-style scrolls as well, and had been able to pick those up pretty easily, much to his surprise. Some were just ways to blow things away, literally, others were slicing moves, and still others allowed him to blow at the ground and push himself up or redirect himself in the air using wind. These had all come naturally to him for some odd reason. Yet when he tried the fire, water, earth, and lightning techniques in the scrolls, they had been harder, and nowhere near as strong as the wind ones, so he had ignored most of those. He had learned one that allowed him to electrify his fingers to shock people or whatever, one to create a fireball, which wasn't large, but still, it was enough for him. One to make a shield out of water, and one to make the earth shoot up spikes, though those were almost so short as to be useless. Once he realized those elements didn't work as well for him, he'd passed on them and concentrated on wind moves. They cut, blew, and were good for both offense and defense anyway, so he didn't mind. Lately, he was working on trying to mix elements into his chakra spinning move, which he hadn't named yet. He had found 5 scrolls detailing how to manipulate each element, and was using his spin move to try to do it. Wind chakra, naturally, he found easy to mix into the move. The other 4 were harder. Lightning wasn't too hard, fire was harder, water somewhat easier than fire, but not as easy as lightning, but earth was dang near impossible. Earth chakra was just too damn stiff to get into those spinning patterns. He'd managed it once, which was interesting to see. It made the chakra turn gold, but he couldn't keep it up very long. He did all this on his own. Just like the shadow clone jutsu he'd learned from that sealing scroll when he was trying to become a genin, he'd done all this just working alone, practicing for hours on end, trying hard. and every so often having a breakthrough. He was proud of what he'd done, but it wasn't easy. He laughed as he thought about how he'd learned to make that spinning sphere. The scroll just said how to do it, not how to learn it. He'd had to improvise somewhat, using anything spherical he could find to make the shape, then he had to figure out how to make the chakra spin and how to make it strong enough. He used a balloon to make the sphere first. Then he used a rubber ball to get the spinning part down. He used his chakra to roll the ball around. It was kinda weird, but he managed. Then, to get the force, he figured out that if he got enough, he could break the ball. Sure enough, that worked. Now he could do it almost without thinking. And he could fire off about 40 of them before he even noticed the drain. He didn't know how he had so much chakra, but he sure wasn't going to complain about it. He was sitting there thinking about all this, when he remembered Hinata's question from that morning. He grimaced, thinking of how everyone else had reacted when they found out what he was. She was one of the very few now who didn't know. And everyone else, Sakura, Sasuke, Kakashi already knew, but the others, Kiba, they all rejected him when they found out. He didn't think Shino cared much one way or the other, but all the others, even Ino, had rejected him. He was afraid Hinata would too. But he knew he'd have to tell her sooner or later. Especially since she'd asked him why he was so willing to move so fast. As he was thinking about this, he didn't notice what he was doing, but he was changing the shape of the spheres he was holding in his hands. He held one in each hand while he thought. It helped him focus. The one in his left hand became the heart he had shown Hinata before, while the one in his right hand became a flat disc, much like a shuriken when it's spinning. That one was also getting smaller and sharper, and he was unconsciously adding wind chakra to it. Suddenly, he came out of his daze and looked at it. He thought a moment, then threw it. He was somewhat surprised that it actually flew and didn't just dissolve, but he got the real shock when it hit the wall and went right through it. He used his chakra to repair the hole. He had learned a couple hole-fixing jutsu. Figured they'd be useful to heal wounds and the like, then looked out the window where the chakra shuriken had sliced up about a dozen trees with glancing blows before slamming into a rock. The shuriken stopped, but the rock had a large cut in it. He was stunned. He hadn't even been trying to do that. About a mile from Naruto's special place, a large man with spiky white hair was peeking into the women's bath when he heard a loud crack, followed by a few sounds like trees being cut, followed by what sounded like a stone shattering. He jumped at the first, then thought hard about the others. He headed off in that direction, curious. After all, it had come from a direction where he knew only one house was, and that house wasn't exactly being used anymore. In a few jumps, he was within sight of the house, just behind the rock he'd heard. Sure enough, the trees leading from the rock to the house were cut up, and he watched as a hole in the wall of the house was repaired from within, obviously with chakra. Okay, what the hell was this? He headed over to the front door and used his key to get in. With Naruto. Naruto heard a key in the front door turn and the door open. He panicked. He'd been sure this place was no longer used. He was about to run when he heard it. Someone in here? A voice called out from downstairs, before heading up to the room he was in. He couldn't get out fast enough, even if he'd wanted to. The door opened and a man stood there. Other than his white hair, he could have been in his 20s, but was more likely in his 40s. Naruto was shocked to find this man, who he had never seen before, standing here in this house. The man gave him a look and asked, "Who are you?" Naruto noticed the look. It wasn't the look everyone else gave him. It was a look of surprise and curiosity, not that cold stare everyone had when they looked at him. He hesitated. This man was old enough to know about his guest. Should he tell him his real name or hide it? He decided to take a chance. "I'm Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki." "I thought so. You're the spitting image of your father." Naruto jumped, stiffened, then slowly, stiffly, looked at the old man. "My father?" he exclaimed louder than he intended, his shock making him yell. "Yes, your father, kid. You look just like him." "You know who my father is?" "Of course I know who he is, I was his sensei." "And you're in his house?" "Wait, this is my father's house?" "But..." "Wait, kid, you mean you don't know who your father is?" Naruto shook his head. "Then how are you here? In this room, in this house?" "How did you know to come here?" "I didn't. I found this place by mistake a year or so ago." I was just exploring the village and happened to find it. I had just learned how to climb trees with chakra, so I walked up and found this window was unlocked, and I came in. I've been kinda hiding out here, learning jutsu and stuff since then. I didn't know it was my father's place. Wow. I'm impressed, kid. So was it you that broke the wall and hit that rock out there? Yeah. Is that why you're here? Yeah, I heard the rock shatter. I decided to come see what was up over here. But wait. If you were in here, how the hell did you do that? A jutsu I learned from one of these scrolls. Naruto gestured at the ones in the room as he said this. It didn't have a name on it, so I don't know what it's called. Show me. Naruto looked a little surprised, but he held out his hand and formed the sphere in his hand. Holy dash, the old man shouted in shock. Naruto looked at him, then suddenly realized something. Okay, old man, you've told me everything, but what I want to know. First off, just who the hell are you? Oh, sorry kid. My name's Jiraiya. I'm the Toad Sage. Don't ask. Believe me, you don't want to know. Naruto accepted that, then said, okay, fine, Jiraiya. You say you were my father's sensei. Who was my father? The Yondaime Hokage, of course. Naruto's jaw dropped so hard it popped. He shook his head, then muttered, wait a second, the fourth was my father? Jiraiya nodded. Why the hell did no one ever tell me this? To protect you. Your father had a lot of enemies, kid. Now, you said that jutsu didn't have a name? Naruto shook his head and showed the old man the scroll he'd learned it from. And you learned this all on your own? Naruto nodded this time. It's called the Rasengan. Your father developed it. But that didn't do what I saw was done to that rock out there. How did you do that? Naruto smiled. Rasengan, huh? Then I guess you could call what did that the Rasen Shuriken. Actually, I like that name. Here, I'll show you. He held out his hand, created a Rasengan, as he now knew it to be called, then flattened it to a disc and added his wind chakra to it. Jiraiya watched this in rapt fascination. And you did this all on your own? Naruto nodded again, happy that someone was actually paying attention to him. Then Jiraiya remembered. You're the Kyuubi container, aren't you? Naruto looked scared, but nodded. I guess you're a hero then. Naruto looked at him, shocked. What? You saved the village from that beast by containing him within you. You're a hero as much as the fourth. He sealed the beast, and you contained it. Neither one would have been possible without the other. So you're a hero. I'm sorry the rest of the idiots in this village don't see it that way. Naruto smiled, then looked at Jiraiya and asked, would you consider taking me on as a student? Please? Jiraiya was surprised to be asked this, then thought a moment and nodded, I'd be happy to, Naruto. Naruto ran over and hugged the man, then pulled back and said, thank you, Jiraiya-sensei. This means a lot to me. Jiraiya laughed, Jiraiya-sensei, huh? It's been a long time since Minato called me that, and no one has since. It's nice to hear it again. Naruto grinned and Jiraiya continued, okay, Naruto, I'll take you on as my apprentice. And you'll be my focus from now on. Let's go, let Sarutobi know. Naruto looked confused at the name. I mean the third, knucklehead. Naruto grinned and nodded. Half an hour later, Hokage's office. The third Hokage looked up when he heard a knock on his door. Come in, he said quietly. The door opened, and Jiraiya and Naruto walked in. He grinned at Naruto, then looked at the man with him and his jaw dropped in shock when he recognized the Toad Sage. Jiraiya? Jiraiya nodded, yes, it's me, Sarutobi-sensei. What are you doing here? Are you looking for Orochimaru? Naruto looked at the third when he mentioned that name, surprised. After all, he'd met that snake already. Nope, can't say that I am, Jiraiya answered. He was about to continue when Naruto interrupted. Orochimaru is here. Jiraiya and the third both looked at him in shock, and he explained, my team ran into him during the second part of the exams. And he put some kind of mark on Sasuke, and a seal on me. Jiraiya said, show me. Naruto did as he was told, peeling his shirts off and making his seal appear. You learned all those jutsu with that on you? Naruto nodded. Wow, kid, you're good. Jiraiya put a hand out in front of him and chakra flared on his fingers. He yelled out 5-pronged seal release, and plunged his hand into Naruto's stomach. Naruto gasped, but sighed in relief when he saw the seal disappear. Jiraiya then said, "Now, show the Hokage that jutsu you showed me." "Sarutobi, you're not going to believe this." Naruto decided to try something. He held his hand out and formed the Rasengan and tried to infuse it with earth chakra and found it shockingly easy. Soon there was a golden sphere swirling in his hand. Jiraiya looked shocked. "You didn't tell me you could infuse it with elemental chakra, kid. Can you do that with other elements?" Naruto grinned, released the sphere, then recreated it first with wind, then lightning, then fire, and finally, water chakra. "I tried earth first here, because that's been the hardest for me. Wind's the easiest." Jiraiya looked ready to faint, then looked at the third, who of course recognized the jutsu too. The third finally found his voice and said, "Naruto, I'm sorry I haven't done more for you in the past. I knew the villagers were cruel to you, and I didn't do anything to stop it. But I really couldn't, the council wouldn't allow it." Naruto nodded at this, showing he understood. Jiraiya told the third about telling Naruto about his father, about the Raisin Shuriken as Naruto called it, finding his father's house, all of it. Naruto grinned when he talked about the Raisin Shuriken, smiled quietly when he talked about him finding the house, and looked embarrassed when he talked about the scrolls and how Naruto had been learning up there. The third told Naruto, "I want you to know, Naruto, that when you turn 18, your dream will come true. You always said you wanted to be Hokage. If I live that long, on that day, you will be named the 5th Hokage." Naruto gasped and then smiled at that. "Just so we're clear, that does not leave this room, got it?" Both Naruto and Jiraiya nodded. Then he looked at Naruto, and added, "And that includes Hinata." Naruto looked down a bit, then nodded. 10 minutes later. As they were leaving the Hokage's office, Jiraiya turned to Naruto. "So, who's Hinata?" Naruto grinned at Jiraiya. "Oh, she's my fiancé, Jiraiya-sensei." Jiraiya looked surprised. "Fiancé, huh? Aren't you a bit young for that?" "Yeah, I guess so, but it's an arranged marriage. I'm more than happy to be with her, and I know she's happy to be with me, so no one's objecting to it. And her father arranged it, so that's all good too." Jiraiya nodded, realizing this kid was mature enough for this, and then smiled. "So, when do I get to meet the young lady?" Naruto gasped, remembering that he'd told Hinata to come back to his place after her training. "I gotta get home. She'll be on her way there soon." "I'm coming with you. I want to meet the young lady." Naruto nodded and ran off to his apartment, Jiraiya keeping up easily. After just a few minutes, they came into sight of Naruto's building. Just as they came into view of it, Naruto saw Hinata going in the front door. He gasped and ran around to the back and leaped to his balcony. Jiraiya followed as he opened the door there and they went in, just as there was a knock at his door. Naruto caught his breath quickly and went to open the door. Hinata was standing there, waiting patiently, when he opened the door. He pulled her in and hugged her tightly. She hugged him back, then they pulled away from each other and kissed gently. When they separated, Hinata saw Jiraiya and blushed. "Hinata, this is my new sensei, Jiraiya," Naruto told her. "Hello, Jiraiya-sensei, it's a pleasure to meet you," Hinata said, bowing. "You as well, young lady. I can see why Naruto here is so bowled over by you." He grinned teasingly as he said this, and Hinata blushed deeper. "Sensei, don't tease her, she's really shy," Naruto said, defending his fiancée. Hinata smiled at this. "Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to embarrass you, young lady." Then Jiraiya smiled. "So, you two are engaged, huh?" She smiled and nodded emphatically. Naruto grinned and told him, "I told you so. And believe me, it's not just her looks, I care about her for who she is too." Naruto put his arm around her waist as he said this. "You'll see, sensei. She's a really sweet girl." Hinata, blushing at her love's praise, said, "Naruto, you told me to come by so you could take me home. We should get going before father starts to worry." Naruto grinned, and said to Jiraiya, "I'll be back in a little bit, okay, sensei?" The old man nodded, and Naruto left hand in hand with Hinata, smiling. They made small talk on the way there, Naruto telling her about his day, leaving out the Hokage's news, along with the bit about his father and him and the fox. And soon they were at the Hyuga compound. Naruto knocked on the door, then kissed her deeply, pulling back so she was blushing when the door opened. Niji was there. Good evening, Niji. Could you let Lord Hayashi know that I'm here, please? Niji nodded and went to get his uncle. A moment later, Hayashi was there. Hello father, I'm here returning your daughter to you, as per our arrangement. Hayashi smiled. I didn't know she was with you, Naruto. Naruto grinned, thinking of that morning. But I thank you for returning her to me. He held out his hand, and Naruto handed Hinata's hand to him. He took it gently, and led Hinata into the house, then smiled at Naruto. Have a good evening, Naruto. Naruto nodded and they parted. Naruto went home, while Hinata went to her room and Hayashi went to the meeting room where the council was waiting for him. Naruto arrived back home 15 minutes after leaving, and Jiraiya grinned at him. Did you have a good time with your girl? Naruto gave him a confused look, and Jiraiya groaned. You mean to tell me you two are virgins? Naruto realized what the old man meant, and snapped, of course we are, you old pervert. We're only 12. Jiraiya laughed. Naruto glared. Alright, pervy sage, knock it off. Jiraiya glared at him, but couldn't deny it, so instead, he changed the subject, hoping the nickname wouldn't stick. Naruto, you've been training alone a long time, I see. Naruto nodded. I may not be the best teacher out there, but I'll try to help you with anything you want to learn. First, I need to see how good your chakra control is. What shapes can you make with the Rasengan? Well, I've only tried a few. I made a ring out of it for Hinata, and the sphere of course, and the shuriken from earlier. That, and one more. Show me. Naruto grimaced, but formed the Rasengan heart he'd made for Hinata. Jiraiya was stunned by this. And you can infuse it with all 5 elements of chakra. Wow, kid, you must be some kind of genius. Naruto grinned. Let's see if we can't improve it even more. Jiraiya spent the next few hours teaching Naruto to make the Rasengan larger, smaller, stronger, weaker, different shapes. All kinds of variants. Naruto practiced for hours, then eventually he had to get to bed for the night. As Jiraiya was leaving, he asked, how many Rasengans can you fire off in a day? Naruto shrugged, then told him, I start to feel the drain after I've done about 40 of them, if I don't release any of them and use them all. Jiraiya, knowing how much chakra the jutsu took, was stunned, but he couldn't show it. If I absorb them back, I don't feel it till I've fired off about 100 of them, Naruto finished. That didn't surprise Jiraiya much, since he himself could fire off about 20 of them without noticing much if he took them back in, but 40 used without feeling it? Sheesh, this kid had one hell of a reserve. Jiraiya was just glad the kid wasn't his enemy. He got up, shook hands with his new student, then left. Naruto chuckled at Jiraiya's reaction, then went and got ready for bed. He fell into bed with a satisfied smile on his face. His dream was going to come true, he had someone who loved him, and now he had a sensei who thought he was a hero. What a day. He fell asleep happily, and was soon having a happy dream of his wedding day, and being Hokage. With Hayashi. As Naruto was falling into bed and sleep, Hayashi was walking into the council chambers to confront the rest of his family leaders. He grinned, thinking of how they'd react to this one. He opened the door and saw the council arrayed around the table therein. He bowed to them slightly, and knelt at the head of the table. He laid his papers down in front of him and immediately sealed the room. They weren't leaving without his permission. And he wasn't giving it till he had what he wanted. What is the meaning of this, Lord Hayashi? A branch family member asked. I've called you all here, for one reason and one reason only, Hayashi stated. I've arranged a marriage for Hinata. What? The whole council yelled as one. Hayashi glared them back into order. You will not oppose me in this, he shouted at them. You won't dare. They waited for him to calm down. He did, then continued, I have arranged for Hinata to marry Naruto Uzumaki. This, of course, set off a ton of responses. The demon? What? And oh, we're a few. With the whole council yelling, Hayashi just glared at them all. I warn you, do not get in my way. His quiet anger was more frightening than his yelling. The council calmed down. One member finally spoke for them all. Why would you arrange for her to marry him? Because she desires it. And because the young man truly desires my daughter's happiness. How can you say that? The boy is an orphan, he must be after our money, our influence. Hayashi grinned. I knew you'd say that. He handed them all a copy of the paperwork he had with him. Read that. He waited while they did. It was a transcript of his conversation with Naruto about Hinata and his marriage. It was signed by himself, the typist, and 2 witnesses who had been in earshot of the conversation, saying it was accurate. This must be a mistake, the same member spoke. With 4 signatures? Hayashi grinned. And you know our typist doesn't make mistakes. I can have Naruto sign it as well, if you'd like. The member shook his head and fell silent. I thought so. Now, this is done, and you will not do anything to get in their way, got me? They all nodded, not daring his anger again. Even the main family members knew he wouldn't hesitate to cut them down if they did, so they all agreed. A couple didn't like it, but most were happy enough to deal with it. Hayashi released the seal on the room and said, "Get out of here. You all have things to do, I'm sure, and I have to go speak to my daughter." Once they were all gone, he went to Hinata's room and knocked softly, in case she was asleep. Hinata jumped slightly at the knock, but answered quickly, "Come in." Her father entered, smiling. She waited for him to sit near her, then queried, "Yes, father?" "I've just spoken to the council about your marriage, Hinata," he said, still smiling. "A couple of the members were dead set against you marrying Naruto, but brought them around. Your marriage is in the clear. We'll announce it to the rest of the village tomorrow." Hinata smiled and hugged her father. "I love you, father. Thank you so much." He smiled and hugged her back. "Father, do me one favor?" He looked at her. "I want to tell someone first, so could you not announce it till after lunchtime tomorrow?" He smiled and nodded. "Thank you, father. You're most welcome, daughter. Now, I suggest you get some sleep. You've got a big day tomorrow. Oh, and tell Naruto to be out front of the Hokage's mansion at 1 p.m. tomorrow, alright?" "Yes, father, we'll both be there. I'll make sure." He smiled at her, then left her room. He retreated to his own bedroom, did his own evening routine, and fell into bed, relieved and happy for his daughter. He fell asleep, smiling gently. Hinata was so happy, she couldn't sit still. She took a long hot shower, relaxing her muscles, then went through her normal night routine, and fell into bed herself. Soon enough, she was asleep, dreaming of Naruto. Tomorrow, she kept thinking. Tomorrow everyone would know about him and her. Then they'd all have to accept it. That's all there was to it. Little did she know that Naruto still had a secret to tell her. Several secrets, actually. But that night, she was just happy that he was hers. Would she be able to stay that way after Naruto revealed himself to her? And would he do it in time? Only time would tell, but for now, Hinata was just glad she had called out to him that day, which wasn't even a week earlier, yet felt like a lifetime ago. She laughed softly, thinking of how a single call really had made all the difference, and how sometimes dreams do come true. When Naruto awoke the next day, he had no idea that it would be any different from any other day. He awoke slowly when his alarm blared at him, turned it off, stretched, then got up and went to get his shower and get ready for the day. He had training with the pervy sage, he had to see Hinata, and he had to figure out when and how to tell her about his guest, his father, his past, all of it. He had to tell her soon, but how? And when? He groaned. It was too much to think about just now. He showered slowly, letting the heated water wash away his tension. He sighed happily as his muscles relaxed and his mind cleared. He decided. He'd tell her today, this morning if he could find her. With that determined, he got out, dried himself off using a jutsu, then went to the kitchen to get breakfast. With Hinata. Hinata awoke shortly after Naruto did, and her thoughts were similar to his, but along a different track. As she showered, letting her muscles relax, she thought of telling him about her father's announcement. She had to tell him this morning, so of course that meant she had to find him early. She tailed off, thinking it'd be better to save her chakra for later. After all, she had a hard day of training ahead of her, not to mention the stress of telling Naruto about her father's announcement and making sure he was there. She sighed, thinking about how hard this day was going to be, but she was determined. After all, this was the day when no one in the village would be able to deny her, or Naruto, what they wanted. She dressed and went to have breakfast with her father and Niji. She was smiling by the time she left the compound to find Naruto. With Naruto. Naruto left his house slowly, trying to think how to find Hinata. He figured she might be looking for him, but he didn't want to rely on that. He stepped out of his house and thought a moment, then put both index and middle fingers together in a cross shape. Shadow clone jutsu, he yelled out, and sent 200 clones to search the village for her. Meanwhile, the original waited at home in case she came there. He didn't have to wait long. About 10 minutes after he sent his clones out, she came up to him, smiling when she saw him sitting out front. He grinned and undid his jutsu, letting the memory sweep over him, laughing at a couple, grimacing at others. "Hey, Hinata. What's up?" he greeted as she came up to him. She looked nervous. "I needed to talk to you, Naruto. It's about my father." "Wait, Hinata. I have to tell you something first. You know how I told you no one in the village had ever accepted me before you?" She nodded. "There's a reason for that. And I know the reason." She looked at him, waiting. "You know the story about what happened 12 years ago, right? The Kyubi attacking the village and the fourth Hokage defeating it?" She nodded, wondering what that had to do with anything, but of course she knew of that story. "Who didn't?" "Well, the story that goes around, about the fourth killing the demon, well, it was slightly exaggerated." She looked confused, but nodded encouragingly to let him know she understood and to go on. "He didn't kill it. It's a demon, and no human could ever kill it. He defeated it by sealing it in a newborn infant. After that, the third Hokage made a law that stated that no one could speak of what really happened. He wanted to protect the one who contained it from the hate of the village, but he failed." His voice trailed off somewhat. She smiled lovingly, and he sighed. "Hinata, the child he sealed the demon in is me." She looked surprised. Hinata thought for a minute, then came over and hugged him. She hugged him harder than she ever had before. He was surprised, but he hugged her back. Eventually, she spoke. "So you're the one." He looked at her, confused. "You saved us. Me, my father, Niji, all of us. You saved us." He smiled. "First Jiraiya, now Hinata." He sighed. He finally had people who accepted him. A sensei and a fiancé. He hugged Hinata tenderly and rubbed her back as she cuddled close to him, neither one caring who saw. After a few minutes, Hinata pulled back and looked at him. "I almost forgot, I have to tell you something." Naruto smiled, then said, "Let's go up to my place. I want to give you something. Then we can talk about it, okay?" She nodded and he took her hand and led her up to his apartment. He opened the door and led her in gently. He sat down on his futon and she sat on one of the chairs, looking nervous. He smiled, forming a small Rasengan in one hand, like the one he used for her ring. He hollowed it out, making the ring again. "So, what's up, Hinata?" She blushed, watching what he was doing. "It's about father." He nodded. "He's going to announce our engagement to the village today. He got the family council to accept it last night. And he's going to announce it to everyone today." He smiled and nodded. While she talked, he was tinkering with his chakra and the ring in his hand. He had figured out he could make things wood-like by combining earth and water, so he was tinkering with other combinations. He was currently trying combining earth and air. That didn't do much. It just cancelled itself out and the ring fell apart. He gestured for her to continue. "When father told me last night, he asked me to make sure you were there. I told him I would, and he said to have you outside the Hokage's mansion at 1 o'clock. So meet me here at 1:45 noon, okay? We'll have lunch and then go over there together, alright?" While she said this, Naruto had created another ring, mixing earth and fire this time. This time, what he wanted to happen did. The earth chakra melted and turned metallic, then he concentrated hard, and the chakra ring became a real ring. Hinata's eyes widened as she saw this, even as she talked. Naruto grinned, then came over to her and handed her the now real ring, sliding it onto her finger. "I told you I'd get you a real ring when I could." She nodded. "And sure, I'll see you here a little before noon." "And Hinata?" She looked at him, hoping against hope he was going to say what she thought he was going to. He did. "I love you. I was thinking about all you've done for me, and how you've been here for me, and all that. And I love you." She blushed prettily. "I love you too, Naruto. I'm glad you were able to tell me before father's announcement." She took his hands in hers and kissed them gently. He turned her up to face him and kissed her lips softly. She responded willingly and they stayed that way a few moments, then separated, smiling at one another. Then she got up and said, I have to go. I have training this morning, and you have to meet with Jiraiya-sensei, don't you? He nodded and she smiled at him. I'll see you soon. I love you. I love you too. I'll see you at lunch. She turned and left, smiling to herself. She went to her training grounds and worked on her taijutsu until lunchtime. Naruto, meanwhile, headed off to his father's house. He was smiling, his real smile, the one he'd almost forgotten he had until Hinata. Upon arriving in the room where the scrolls were, Naruto was pleased to find Jiraiya waiting for him. I'm not used to having a sensei who actually arrives on time, he commented as he came in. It's a major improvement. Jiraiya laughed. I told you I'd be here, Naruto. Now, what do you want to work on today? Actually, first I want to show you something, then I have something I want to ask about and we'll go from there, fair? Jiraiya nodded. Naruto formed a Rasengan. Then he added earth chakra to it, then mixed it with fire and formed a steel ball. He handed it to Jiraiya. Jiraiya looked at the ball in surprise. He had never heard of anything like this. The kid had turned his chakra into a physical thing. Naruto told him about the ring, mentioning that it was a different metal, then asked his question. Could it be possible to have more than 2 elements mixed together in the Rasengan? Could I maybe have all 5 in it? Jiraiya thought about that. I guess it's possible, though I've never known anyone who could wield all 5 elements easily enough to do that. I want to try, Naruto said. But if it gets dangerous, I need you to take it from me so I don't get hurt. Jiraiya nodded. Naruto added, by the way, why would wind be the easiest one for me to use? Jiraiya was surprised by that. I guess that you must have a natural affinity for wind. That would be your basic element, if you will. Naruto nodded, not quite getting it, but he got the idea. He formed a Rasengan again, pumping wind into it first. It turned green and glowed a little in his hand. He made the ball smaller so it would still fit in his hand once all 5 were in it. Then he added fire. Then earth. By then it was an odd shade of gray, with an orange tint. When he added water, he was afraid the fire would go out or something, but it turned a shade of yellow instead, all 4 elements mixing together in the sphere, which was still small enough to easily fit in his hand. Then he added the final element, lightning, and the sphere glowed white. He grinned. I'm impressed, kid. Don't let that go just yet. Naruto nodded. Try to form it into your Rasen Shuriken. Naruto nodded and concentrated a minute, and sure enough, it formed into the flat disc. Jiraiya pointed at the wall. Throw it as hard as you can. There's nothing that way for a mile, then there's the spring, which is empty right now. Naruto did as he was told. The 2 heard wood being cut, stones shattering, and then a splash as it slammed into the hot springs. Then nothing, as the disc was stopped by that. Naruto grinned at Jiraiya. How was that, pervy sage? Jiraiya laughed at the affectionate nickname and ruffled the kid's hair. I'm impressed, kid. You've already surpassed me. Your father too. But I think there are some things I can still teach you. Naruto grinned, eager to learn. He and Jiraiya spent the next few hours working on seals, wind jutsu, fire/wind combination jutsu, earth jutsu, and even a water jutsu. Naruto soaked it up like a sponge. He had never been given the time of day before, so to have someone teaching just him like this was a dream come true for him, and he was determined not to waste the opportunity. He worked hard, learning everything Jiraiya could throw at him, and just when he thought he was getting a jutsu down, the old man would add something to it to keep him pushing himself and trying new things. He soon had several wind jutsu down, along with a pretty good defensive earth jutsu, a fire/wind combo attack, and a water attack. Jiraiya was amazed, the kid had learned so much so fast. Naruto was just happy to have an attentive sensei. All too soon, he realized he had to head home. Of course, Naruto had told Jiraiya about Hayashi's announcement. But what about Hinata? She did say she wanted to tell someone. Who? With Hinata. Hinata walked up to the door and knocked on it firmly. Shortly, the door opened and Hinata smiled at the sight of her friend. Can I talk to you? Hinata's friend nodded. They went up to her room and sat down, Hinata in a seat, her friend on her bed. My father is going to make an announcement today after lunchtime, but I wanted to tell you first. What is it? The pink-haired girl looked confused. It's about your teammate, Hinata said, knowing the girl would think of Sasuke. What would your father have to announce about Sasuke? Sakura asked, making Hinata giggle. Not Sasuke, Sakura. I mean your other teammate, Naruto. Sakura grimaced at the sound of her teammate's name. I wanted to tell you myself, because you're my best friend, Sakura. Sakura smiled a little. What is it, then, Hinata? Well, Naruto and I are going to get married when we're both of age. Sakura's jaw dropped. She remembered how persistently the blonde knucklehead had asked her out up until the mission to the Land of Waves, and how suddenly it had stopped after that. He had gotten so withdrawn after that. Not that Sakura really cared. No one did. But then she remembered how Naruto had been about to give in to Kiba until Hinata called out to him. Maybe someone did care. And now this. Apparently Hinata had never gotten over her crush. But then, she must not know what Naruto was. Do you know what he is, Hinata? If you mean about the fox, yes, I know. Sakura was shocked again. So Hinata knew and still wanted to be with the boy. So be it. Well, Hinata, I guess if you're happy, I'm happy for you. And I know you've always loved that knucklehead, so I'm glad you finally got him. Hinata smiled and hugged Sakura. The two of them had gotten close after Sakura had come back from the wave mission, and now they were best friends. Sakura was truly happy for her friend. After a few more minutes of small talk, Hinata left Sakura's to head back to Naruto's to meet him for lunch, before the announcement. She was smiling as she walked. She had been nervous telling Sakura, but she was glad her friend had accepted it. With Naruto. Naruto waited in his apartment, lunch ready. For when Hinata would come. He didn't have to wait long. He had just finished setting everything up for them when he heard a knock at the door. He opened it and smiled. Hey, Hinata. Come in. Lunch is just ready. Hinata smiled and came in. Wow, Naruto, did you do all this? He nodded. It wasn't a large meal, but it had taken a while to set it all up. He had the table draped in a long tablecloth and a single candle lighting the table, small sandwiches on a large tray. Mixed juices to drink, a finger tray of fresh vegetables. Easy, cool, and simple, yet it was a feast to her. She was happy, and he was happy because of it. They sat together and ate, Hinata fiddling with the ring he gave her from time to time. Naruto saw this and smiled. You excited, Hinata? She nodded. Me too. I'm just so happy being with you, and now the village will have to accept that we're together. She nodded again, smiling. I love you. I love you, too, Naruto. Her voice sent pleasant chills up his spine as she smiled at him. After they ate, they decided to walk to the Hokage's mansion together, to get there early. Upon arriving at the Hokage's mansion, Naruto and Hinata made their way to the outdoor patio, where the announcement would be made. They sat and looked up at the Hokage images on the mountainside. Naruto remembered he had yet to tell Hinata his other secret. Oh, well, it would wait till after the announcement. He smiled. At least that secret was a good one. He looked up at the image of the fourth, grinning, wondering what his father had been like in life. He'd have to ask Jiraiya. After all, he had been his father's sensei. He'd know. He held Hinata's hand gently as they waited. A few minutes later, Hayashi arrived. He found the two lovebirds holding hands and looking at the mountainside images. He grinned his prankster grin and decided to have some fun with the two of them. He sneaked up on them, careful not to make a sound, then put a hand heavily on one shoulder of each kid, making both of them jump so far they landed on their feet, yelling out as they did. He pulled back and laughed loud and long, his laugh deep and rich at the looks on their faces. After getting over their initial embarrassment, the two kids laughed along with him till all three of them were holding their sides and had tears falling from their eyes. Just then, the third Hokage came out and saw them laughing. He came over and said, I'm glad to see this joyful day has already gotten such a good start. The three calmed down and smiled at him. Indeed it has, Lord Hokage, Hayashi said, bowing slightly. This day will indeed be a joyful one if all of the village greets this couple with the same open arms I have shown them. The Hokage laughed at Hayashi's optimism, but then said seriously, don't let the villagers' reactions put a damper on this day. You should all be very happy. This is indeed a joyful occasion, and one to be celebrated. All three responded at the same time, thank you, Lord Hokage. The third smiled, proud of his villagers, or at least these three. He could tell the two kids had a strong bond already. It was about this time that Hayashi saw Hinata's ring. Daughter, I don't believe you had that ring when you left this morning. Hinata smiled and showed it to him. He saw it was pure white gold after a moment, then turned to Naruto. How did you come to afford that, young man? He didn't really care, he was just curious. I made it, father, Naruto replied. Ask Hinata, she saw me do it. Hinata looked at her father and nodded. I used my chakra to form it. Hayashi and the Hokage were both impressed by this, but neither really showed it. Naruto didn't care, he was proud of himself. He held Hinata's right hand gently, happy to be close to her. Hayashi and the Hokage smiled at the two kids, happy they had found love so early in life, and proud of the two for being so mature. Soon, the villagers started to arrive on the square below. Some were there because they had been told Hayashi had an announcement, others because the Hokage had summoned them there, and still others had just followed the crowd. Only Sakura knew what was coming, and she only knew one part. No one there knew Jiraiya was going to show up and make his own set of announcements. When the Hokage got up and started to address the assembly, Naruto turned to Hinata. Hey, Hinata, he whispered. She looked at him and he gestured at the mountainside images. Do any of them look familiar? As he asked this, he set his face in the same expression as the image of the fourth. Hinata looked from Naruto to the images, and slowly she noticed there was one that did. The fourth, you look a lot like him. Naruto smiled. He's my dad, he told her. She gasped, then smiled at him. You're teasing me, aren't you? She asked. No, not at all. Jiraiya told me he was the fourth sensei and that he was my father. Truly. Hinata smiled at this. She was even happier to be with Naruto now. She hugged him and he hugged her back, not ashamed, even though they were in front of the whole village. The Hokage finished his greeting and Hayashi stood and addressed the village. I thank you all for gathering here today. I have an announcement to make about my daughter and heir. I have arranged for her to be married. Hinata, please come up here. Hinata stood and joined her father, a happy smile on her face. My daughter, Hinata, I have arranged for you to be married. Do you accept? Hinata smiled and nodded. Then would her future husband please come and join her? Naruto rose and joined Hinata, taking her hand again. Young man, Naruto, do you accept Hinata as your future bride? Naruto smiled, I do, sir. Suddenly, the villagers were very vocal. A few of the kids just smiled, Shikamaru for instance, while others, Ino for one, shrieked in envy that Hinata had her guy before they did. And still others cheered Naruto for getting such a beauty so early. Kiba was jealous of Naruto, but he determined to set that aside and give the knucklehead a chance, for Hinata's sake. Naruto and Hinata just smiled, realizing that even if they yelled, the villagers were getting used to the idea and accepted it. Naruto pulled Hinata closer and put an arm around her shoulders, smiling at her. She smiled back and they were about to go and sit down, when Hayashi finished his statement. That's all. I wanted to make this public knowledge so that no one could stop this marriage. My daughter's happiness is hereby assured. He was turning away to allow the Hokage to release the assembly, when suddenly there was a rather large burst of smoke. As it cleared, the villagers gasped as one. Jiraiya was there, standing where Hayashi had been just moments before. Jiraiya glared at the villagers, then turned to the third. May I, Lord Hokage? The third nodded and Jiraiya turned back to the villagers with a very angry glare, fixing them all. How dare you, he yelled at them. He pointed at Naruto and gestured for him to come back there. He brought Hinata with him, not sure what was going on. This young man has suffered your indignities, your beatings, every evil thing you have done to him, and he has never fought you back. He dreams of being Hokage one day, and you've all told him he's worthless. Do any of you know who this young man is? The few who knew who Naruto was looked down, but most shook their heads. Hinata grinned proudly. Jiraiya pointed at the image of the fourth and yelled at the villagers, this boy is the son of the fourth Hokage. Most of the villagers gasped. Most of them really hadn't known. You all abused him because of what is inside him. The Kyubi. Enough of this bullshit law, Hokage, it's time this ended. This boy saved this village from the demon by containing it within himself and you all abused him for it. And he's the son of the fourth who sealed the demon. And you abused him. How dare you? Jiraiya seethed. He breathed deep to calm down, then turned to Hinata and Naruto. He said to them, quietly, would you both like to train with me? Hinata gasped, blushed, then nodded. Naruto nodded as well, of course. Jiraiya turned back to the villagers and told them, from this day forth, these two young people will study under me. They will be my pupils from this day forth. Hayashi, you may continue to train your daughter of course, but they will both train with me as well. Any objections? No one spoke, so the Toad Sage continued, good. Now, I'll turn you back over to the Hokage. But I warn you all, if this abuse doesn't stop right now, I will visit vengeance on the head of every single one of you who abuses this boy personally. The villagers cringed. And Jiraiya disappeared in a puff of smoke. The third walked back to the podium and told the assembled villagers that the assembly was over, then thanked them for coming and dismissed them. The assembly disappeared within less than a minute, and the third proceeded back into his mansion, leaving Naruto and Hinata alone on the patio. They sat and talked a while, then Naruto walked her home. They talked excitedly about training together with Jiraiya, about the exams, about everything. They were both happy. Naruto returned Hinata to Hayashi, then went to seek out Jiraiya. Jiraiya was waiting for Naruto in the scroll room. It didn't take Naruto long to find him there. He walked in and sat down, waiting for the sage to notice him. Jiraiya turned to him. I'm sorry I didn't warn you about that earlier, Naruto. It's okay. I actually was looking for you to thank you for doing that. That's the first time anyone has ever stood up for me in public like that. So, thank you, Jiraiya-sensei. Naruto bowed to his sensei. Also, thank you for taking on Hinata as well. I was afraid if you were training me it would make it harder for me to see her, but now it'll be easier, so thank you for that too. Jiraiya sighed. Kid, I didn't do all that just to help you out. Naruto looked at him, confused. I see a lot of raw talent in both you and that talent is being wasted as it is, so I decided to help you both bring it out to better serve the village. And maybe you two can help me. Remember, I have a duty to take down Orochimaru if I can, and I suspect the two of you can help me with that. Naruto nodded, thoughtful. Jiraiya continued, you both got training in the morning, so bring her with you when you come here, alright? Naruto nodded again. Well, we've got an early morning ahead of us, so you better head home and get some rest. Yeah, I'll see you in the morning, sensei. Naruto bowed and left. Jiraiya smiled. He had been given permission to stay in his old student's home, so he got ready and went to bed. Naruto went home, ate a light dinner, and crawled into bed. And Hinata ate dinner with her family, too happy to be bothered by anything, then she also went to bed. The three all fell into bed at the same time and all fell asleep at the same time. Jiraiya was thinking of the training he'd be doing starting the next day, but both Naruto and Hinata were thinking of one another, and how great it would be to spend all day, every day, together. Training, dating, everything. They both smiled. Naruto once again, not for the last time, replayed his match with Kiba in his mind. He smiled, thinking yet again that a single call really could make all the difference in the world. He fell asleep smiling. Hinata was thinking of her battle with Neji, and how she had been inspired by Naruto to win, and then how she had helped Neji and earned his respect. She remembered Naruto calling out to her, and she thought that his call had made all the difference for her as well. So it was that she fell asleep smiling as well. Naruto, Hinata, and Jiraiya were all looking forward to the next day, each for his or her own reason. The two preteens kept thinking about how a simple thing could change everything, and Jiraiya kept thinking about how he was determined to not fail his new students. And so began a new chapter in all their lives. This was all for now. Thank you for watching, I hope you liked it and that you will be back for more. Please like, share and subscribe. See ya.